Hello and welcome to Justice Strategy and Alliances for 2024 for the last time this unit will be run. If you haven't met me before, I'm Scott Beattie, I'm the unit coordinator, and this is a video to quickly introduce you to the unit, what it's about, and a quick overview of the assessment. So let's get right into it. What is this unit about? I've had the sort of faint praise from students for a couple of years in a row who've said this unit isn't as bad as I thought it was going to be. And I think the point was that the title of the subject doesn't necessarily sound the most exciting. It doesn't sound like, Criminology 1102, serial murder and cannibals or something like that. Also, I know a few students who've had, I think, have been quite scarred by workplace strategy and planning sessions, which are neither strategic nor seem to involve very much planning. But if you've been to these sort of things, you will know how awful they are, and how it's sort of the opposite of what we're aiming for in this unit. It just involves you listening to a whole lot of people from HR talk about missions and values and things, rather than actually doing any kind of planning. So what this unit is about, where it comes from consultation with industry, with employers, when we were setting up the criminology programs, and asking them what things were not covered in a conventional criminology degree that they'd really like to see covered. And one of those, and the most important one for most of them, was strategic thinking. So a lot of graduates come out with very much the textbook view of what the world's like, very much the skills they pick up from writing assignments, and aren't necessarily equipped to work in a complex environment, particularly in an interagency environment. And criminal justice is a very, very complex interagency set of different systems and different organisations, and they don't play well together, generally speaking. So the people I spoke to said we need to have people who out of the gate are better at negotiating with other organisations, setting goals, setting plans, and doing this in a really realistic way, not in this up in the air kind of what are our missions and values, like what are we actually going to achieve, what are we actually going to get done. I had a student tell me a few years ago who was a serving police officer. It was quite a few years ago now. He talked about he was working with the federal police, and he talked about a big child pornography sting operation that they'd done. This was obviously, off the books in terms of telling me about it. But he said there was this huge sting operation, and at the end of the day, they found that there were no actual child pornographers in the network that they exposed. They were all policing departments. So basically everyone, the federal police, the different state police, the Independent Commission Against Corruption, all these different organisations had their own tailored working groups who were setting up these traps to entrap these child pornography networks, and all they were doing was entrapping each other. And I think that's sort of funny in a dark way, but it's a good example of what tends to happen in the criminal justice field. And if you add in courts, corrections, whatever else, you've got a situation that's often very competitive, and it's competitive in a way that it need not be. It's in a very counterproductive way. So we're going to talk about that sort of thing this term, and we're going to think about ways in which we can be better at working with others in fairly practical ways. And we'll draw on a lot of the existing literature around strategy and strategic thinking. And again, some of it tends to be a bit on the woolly side and a bit on the, the guide that businessmen buy at the airport to tuck under their arms to pretend they're reading on the plane about, I think strategically like Sun Tzu. But I've managed to find some real gems in there in terms of real practical guides to strategy. And obviously, if all we were doing was reading, it would be a fairly boring unit. So as a result, the initial design of this unit is based around a learning simulation that persists from week to week, that involves making decisions between different agencies, brokering deals, distributing resources, and so on, to try and achieve better outcomes for a fictional city. Now, there's more materials on what that is elsewhere on Moodle, and I'll definitely be talking about in the first few weeks. The main problem with this, though, is that it requires about 10 people attending each week to make it work. Either attending in class or being very attentive to what happens in class and responding online using MS Teams or something like that. Now, this was designed. The unit was designed in the pre-COVID times, where of a class this size, that was a reasonable number of people to attend. However, I have noticed in the last 2 years that numbers of attendance have declined significantly, and it's not the place to sort of comment on that or to discuss that. But what it does mean is, for a unit like this, if we only have a very small number of people attending from week to week, then the scenario doesn't work, that it fails. So this is something to think about and for us to discuss in the first few weeks. I do have a set of alternative assessments that are on Moodle that we used last year when we didn't have enough people attending to run the sim, and we can use those this year as well. But it needs to be a decision, I guess, and a commitment from the group that if I can be sure that there's going to be enough of the team attending week to week, then we can get started with the standard assessment based around the scenario. However, I don't want to be unrealistic about this, and if the truth of the matter is we're only going to have a small attendance level, then we'll go with the alternative assessment, which is much more of your conventional essay style assessment. But it doesn't necessarily need people to be there in person for it to work. Okay, in terms of the other assessment items, I'll run through those in order. The first couple are the same regardless of what format we run with. The first is I think I've called it a pulse check. It's a quiz. It's purely formative. It gives you a little bit of feedback. It doesn't cost any grades. It's not worth any grades either way. But it serves for a couple of purposes. One is to give you some initial feedback on how well you're understanding the first week's materials. The other is to give me a bit of feedback about who's around and who's participating, and that feeds into our other systems in terms of trying to notify people who we think might have registered in the unit and then dropped out but forgotten to actually drop out formally. And we'll have more of that before Census Week. You'll get messages if you have not been attending or accessing Moodle and those sort of things. Now, obviously, if you're listening to this video, you're probably not going to get that message, but just in case. The next assessment task, which is the same for both assessment modes, is the workbook. If you've done any criminology units before, you'll be familiar with this. It's basically a report on the workshop activities for that week, which ideally you'll be doing in the workshop, or you'll be doing in your own study group that you've organised in your own time, or worst comes to worst, you've found someone else who you can twist their arm into working through the material with you. You do get much better value, because obviously there's diminishing returns. You get best value, of course, in the tutorial, because I can help you out and discuss things. You also get the second best option is really working with your peers in your own study group, and obviously someone who doesn't know anything about the readings or materials or anything is going to be your worst option for that. But it's better than trying to work through it on your own, because these all the activities from week to week are based around discourse, around conversations and discussions and challenges and projects and things, and are much more difficult to do by yourself. So the workbook is 30%. You pick your 6 that you think you did, that you think were your favourites, and you write them up and you hand them in at the end of term. All right, the other 2 assessment tasks are a case study worth 30% and a written report worth 40%. Now I'll just talk through what the core versions of these are for now, which is the versions that if we run with the full sim, and I'll leave you to have a look at the alternatives on Moodle if you are thinking of going down that path. The case study, the core version is the scenario design. Each week in the scenario, there are different case studies that you access that present certain challenges for your teams to start to work on and to seek to solve, and you need to solve them by applying resources or doing deals with other groups and getting their resources to help in whatever. We'll talk about that later, but there's a whole set of these scenarios that I've written and that previous groups of students have written that are used in the simulation. So your first assessment that's due in week 7 is writing another of these scenarios. Now there's a template there's all sorts of material to back you up on it, but it's basically finding a criminology or criminal justice themed problem for the scenario that can be used in future versions, although it won't be run at CQU again. I'll probably be hoping to run it again in other places. You develop one of those scenarios and you back it up with the research you've done into what are you basing that scenario on. So it is very much a case study, and it is very much based on understanding how the simulation works and contributing to its future development. The other major piece of assessment is a strategic evaluation. It's worth 40%. It's due in the examination week at the end, right at the very end, and it's there's guidance for it in your materials there, but it's based on application of what you've learnt throughout the term to the simulation. So it's basically saying, this is what I've learnt from participating in the simulation this term. You don't have to cover absolutely everything. It might be better to cover one particular part of strategic thinking that you thought was useful. And you use the materials, both the materials you've gotten in your reader and your independent research, to back up what you're saying. So it's not just this is what I did on my holidays kind of report. It is very much based in the theory, and it's based in research, and it's based in you going to your readings and beyond those readings and being able to say, this is part of strategic thinking that I developed during this semester. I developed it using the scenario, or I found the simulation, or I found the simulation didn't really work in this way. And that's fine as well. You don't have to, all praise the simulation, but you can say that this is a area where you thought the simulation didn't work, and this is what you think should have been done, and this is what you learned about strategy that way. So there's a lot of different options, and then they're going to become more apparent week to week as you study those materials, but it's an application assignment. It's not hugely long. It's 1,500 words. So really you could just pick one particular thing. What I learned about affinity groups, I can apply in this particular way. Here are the elements, here's the explanation, here's the evidence. Bang, there you go. So those are the assessment tasks. 3 are summative, in that they are done for grades. 1's formative, which is a feedback, that feedback pulse check that's coming up very soon. If you've got more questions, have a chat about it in the first workshop, have a chat about it in teams, and one of those first things we will be talking about in that first week is which format are we going to go with this term? Do we have enough keen people who are going to be able to commit to coming along each week, or are we going to have to try for something that's going to work with less engagement and less participation? All right, I hope to see you all soon.